"Pretend to be my wife," he said, low, rough, desperate, like the words had been dragged out of somewhere he'd sealed shut for years. She stood in his doorway, soaking wet, owning nothing but a worn satchel and a name she hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. He wasn't asking for love. He wasn't offering kindness. He was a man cornered by grief and greed, reaching for the only rope left, and she happened to be holding it. If this story already has your heart hit, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and ride with us till the very end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The rain came sideways that Tuesday night, the kind that didn't bother announcing itself. It just arrived and made the world miserable without apology. Evelyn Hayes had been walking for 3 hours. Her boots were ruined. The left sole had separated somewhere around mile 7 and slapped against the mud with every step, a sound so humiliating she'd started counting it just to stay sane. 1, slap. 2, slap. 3, keep moving. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She knew the direction away from the train depot in Crestfall, where her last $4 had run out. Away from the telegraph office, where she'd spent 2 hours working up the nerve to wire her cousin in Montana, only to discover the line was down. Away from the memory of a man in a gray suit who had stood outside the Chicago boarding house she'd fled 3 weeks ago and smiled at her the way a trap smiles at something small and warm. She saw the light from the ranch house through the trees before she saw the house itself. Just a single amber glow steady against the dark. The kind of light that means someone is still awake. Someone is still there. Evelyn told herself she would just ask for directions. She knocked twice. Nobody answered. She knocked harder because the rain was winning. The door opened. The man standing in the doorway was tall, not exaggeratedly so, but tall enough that her eyes had to travel to find his face. Dark hair damp at the temples despite being inside. Jaw like something quarried rather than grown. Eyes the color of still water that hasn't decided yet whether it's gray or green. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected on his property, not hostile exactly, not welcoming either. Somewhere between the two in a territory she didn't have a name for. "Whatever you're selling," he said flatly, "I'm not buying." "I'm not selling anything." Evelyn straightened her spine. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her. "I'm asking for shelter from the rain, just for tonight. I can work for it. I sew, I cook, I'll muck stalls if that's what you need. I'm not asking for charity." He studied her for a long moment without speaking. "You're not from around here." "No." "Where are you headed?" She hesitated just a half-second too long. His eyes narrowed. Not aggressive, more like a man cataloging small details out of habit. The kind of habit that forms when you've lived alone long enough that reading silence becomes a survival skill. "I don't want trouble on my land," he said. "I'm not trouble. I'm just wet." Something shifted in his expression. Not softened, shifted, like a door that doesn't open but moves slightly in its frame. "Barn's around the side," he said. "Dry enough? I'll have the cook leave something by the door." He started to close it. "Sir?" He stopped. "Thank you," Evelyn said. And she meant it in all the ways a person means something when they've been running long enough that even a barn starts to look like mercy. He closed the door. She slept in the barn. She slept better than she had in 3 weeks. In the morning, she found a plate of biscuits and cold bacon balanced on the fence post outside, covered with a cloth. No note, no instruction, just food left by someone who didn't particularly want her to know they'd left it. She ate every bite standing in the early light, looking out at Blackstone Ranch for the first time in daylight. It was a serious piece of land. Not showy nothing out here was showy. But it had the settled, dense gravity of a place that had been worked hard for a long time. The kind of ranch that doesn't brag because it doesn't need to, and it needed work. Not the major infrastructure, the fences were solid, the outbuildings sound, but the smaller things. The window boxes were rotting. The front porch railing had a broken post propped against it rather than repaired. The kitchen garden had clearly been abandoned mid-season. There were 3 pairs of work gloves hanging on a nail beside the barn door, each in varying stages of deterioration, as if the thought of replacing them had just never risen high enough to matter. It was the look of a place where a man was surviving, but not living. She found him at the corral, working a young gray mare that clearly did not want to be worked. The horse was spinning, snorting, throwing her weight against the lead line with the desperate energy of something that hadn't yet learned the difference between danger and inconvenience. He was patient with her. That was the thing Evelyn noticed, and filed away without meaning to the man who'd been flat-voiced and guarded in his own doorway, was completely different with that horse. Still quiet, still economical with his movements. But the patience in his hands was real, not performed. Evelyn watched from a distance for a moment, then walked toward the fence. "She doesn't trust the lead yet," Evelyn said. He didn't look up. "She will." "How long have you been working her?" 3 weeks. "She's scared, not stubborn." He did look up at that. "You know horses." "My father had a small farm." Before she stopped. "I know enough." He studied her again with that cataloging look. "You planning to just stand there? Or were you thinking about leaving?" "I was thinking," Evelyn said carefully, "about asking if there was real work here, paid or in trade, not just a night." The mare yanked the line. He brought her back around with one smooth pull. No panic, no anger, just the calm certainty of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "I run a cattle ranch. I've got 4 hands, a cook, and a housekeeper who quit last month. I'm not running a boarding house." "Your housekeeper quit." "That's what I said." "What happened to her?" A pause. "She didn't like the conditions." Evelyn looked at the broken porch railing, at the dead kitchen garden, at the general air of a place where someone had stopped caring about anything that didn't directly relate to keeping cattle alive. "I see," she said. "You shouldn't read things into that." "I wasn't reading. I was observing." He handed the mare's lead to one of the ranch hands approaching from the side, a young man with red hair who looked like he'd been awake since before the sun, and walked to the fence, resting his forearms on the top rail. Up close, he was more tired than she'd noticed the night before. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't reach. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn Hayes." "Noah Carter." He didn't offer his hand. "I'll give you a week's trial. Cook needs help with the heavier cleaning, and there's mending backed up since for a while. You sleep in the house, you eat with the hands, you don't ask personal questions, and you mind your own business. That fair?" "That's fair," Evelyn said. "One more thing." His voice was flat. "My family doesn't visit this ranch. What happens on this land is my business and nobody else's. If that changes, I'll tell you. Until then, you don't talk about me to anyone in town. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear," Evelyn said. She held his gaze. He held hers. Then he walked back to his horse, and Evelyn Hayes walked up to the house that didn't know yet what she was about to do to it. By the 3rd day, she had reorganized the entire kitchen storage. By the 4th, she'd repaired 12 shirts belonging to the ranch hands, replaced the rotting window box boards with salvaged lumber from the barn, and restarted the kitchen garden with seedlings the cook had given up on. Hattie the cook was a compact woman in her 60s, with iron gray hair and the suspicious watchfulness of someone who'd seen too many people come and go from this ranch to get attached quickly. She watched Evelyn work for 2 full days before saying anything beyond basic instruction. Then, on the 3rd morning, she set a cup of coffee in front of Evelyn without being asked. "You so good," Hattie said. It wasn't exactly a compliment. It was more like a verdict. "I was a seamstress in Chicago." "Chicago." Hattie said it the way people say the name of a place they've heard cautionary tales about. "Long way to come for a ranch job in Wyoming." "I needed a change." Hattie poured her own coffee and sat down across the table. This felt significant. The woman hadn't sat at this table the entire time Evelyn had been there. She always ate standing near the stove. "He's not a bad man," Hattie said, not as an opener, more like the middle of a conversation she'd already been having with herself. "He's a man who's been carrying something too heavy for too long and hasn't figured out how to set it down. So he just keeps walking, works himself half to death. Doesn't talk to anyone who doesn't work here. Sent away the last 3 women who took this job inside of 2 weeks. Why? Because they asked questions. Hattie looked at her directly. Same as you're doing now. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her cup. I'm not asking about him. I'm asking about the job so I can do it properly. Sure you are? Hattie stood. He lost his wife. And the baby she was carrying. 3 winters ago in a carriage accident on the North Road. He blames himself because he was the one driving. She said it plainly without ceremony, as if the fact had calcified enough that it no longer needed to be handled carefully. So now you know. Don't bring it up. Don't reference it. And for the love of everything good, don't try to help him feel better about it. He doesn't want that. He just wants things to run. Evelyn nodded. Hattie turned back to the stove. The mending basket's on the chair by the parlor window. There's curtains in that room that have been needing repair since before Margaret died. She said the name as if testing something. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't ask, didn't offer condolences to the heir. Hattie nodded once, as if that passed some test she hadn't announced. She had been on the ranch 11 days when the telegram arrived. She didn't see Noah's face when he read it. She only knew something had shifted when he came in for supper and sat at the head of the table without eating. He stared at his plate for a full minute, while the ranch hands ate around him in practiced careful silence. The silence of men who understood that their employer's moods were weather, and weather couldn't be argued with. Then he pushed back from the table. Evelyn, when you're done. She found him in the parlor. He was standing at the window with the telegram in his hand, facing away from her, which she understood as meaning he didn't trust himself to say what he needed to say while looking at someone. My father is dying, he said without turning. He's been sick for 2 months. He didn't tell me because we don't... He stopped. Restarted differently. We don't have a close relationship. He's telling me now because he needs something. Evelyn said nothing, just waited. He wants to meet my wife, Noah said, before he signs the ranch property over to the family trust. He says, he read directly from the telegram, his voice flat. He says he won't pass the land to a man who's buried himself alive. He says a man who won't let himself be loved doesn't deserve to be trusted with something that needs tending. The room held the silence for a moment. He's going to give it to my cousin, Noah said. Silas, if there's no wife. What does the land mean? Evelyn asked. Noah turned then. This ranch is on my father's original deed. If he folds it into the family trust instead of signing it directly to me, Silas controls it within 2 years. He'll sell it to the mining company that's been circling this county for a decade. He looked at her steadily. I've run this land for 15 years. My hands built half these fences. My father knows that, and he's choosing to ignore it because he's a man who spent his whole life making conditions out of things that shouldn't have conditions. And your wife, Evelyn said carefully. She's been gone 3 years. Yes. And he doesn't know. I didn't tell him. He didn't ask. We communicate once a year by letter, and I say as little as possible, and so does he. His jaw tightened. Until now. Evelyn looked at the telegram in his hand. When does he want to visit? He's not visiting. He's summoning. He's sent his doctor and his lawyer, and apparently Silas and Silas's wife are accompanying him as well. They'll arrive in 8 days. He's renting rooms in Crestfall and expects me to bring... He stopped. Set the telegram on the mantel face down. He expects to meet her. The quiet stretched between them. Evelyn understood what was coming before he said it. She understood it the way you understand approaching weather before you can actually name the clouds. Noah Carter crossed his arms over his chest. He looked like a man going to war with himself. I don't have a right to ask you this, he said. I'm aware of that. And I'm going to ask you anyway because I've spent 3 days trying to think of another solution, and there isn't one. He looked at her directly, something that seemed to cost him. I need you to pretend to be my wife, for 1 week, while my father is here. After that you can leave with a full month's wages regardless of how much time you've actually worked, and I'll give you a written reference for any household position in this territory. The silence that followed was dense. Why me? Evelyn asked. Because you're here. Because you're intelligent enough to hold a conversation without making it obvious. And because you've been on this ranch for 2 weeks and not one person in Crestfall knows your name." He paused. "And because you don't ask where you came from." Evelyn felt the specific sting of that last sentence, the way it was true and blunt and cost him something to say. "This is a significant thing to ask," she said. "I know. If it went wrong, if your father or his lawyer suspected something, I know. You'd lose the ranch anyway, and I would have lied on your behalf for nothing. I know all of that." His voice was low, rough at the edges, in a way she hadn't heard before. Not anger, something rawer. "I'm not asking you to love this place. I'm asking you to help me keep it." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the barn where she'd slept her first night, about the biscuits left on the fence post with no note, about the gray mare he'd worked for 3 weeks with nothing but patience. She thought about the man in the gray suit standing outside the boarding house in Chicago smiling. She thought about what it cost to trust anyone at all. "1 week," she said. Noah Carter nodded once. "Starting when?" she asked. 8 days from now. I'll need to move you into the main house before they arrive. And your ranch hands. Hattie and Tom have been here long enough. They'll keep it to themselves." He picked the telegram up again, studied it once more, as if looking for an escape he'd missed. Found none. Set it back down. "The others won't know the difference. And after," he looked at her, "after you leave, as we agreed." It was the particular flatness of someone saying the only thing left to say, and they both knew it. "Fine," Evelyn said. She turned toward the hallway. "Miss Hayes." She stopped. "You won't be asked to—" He searched for the word. "This is a business arrangement. Your dignity won't be compromised. You have my word on that." Evelyn didn't turn around. "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Carter." She walked down the hall and stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, her hand flat against the frame, feeling the solid weight of a decision she couldn't entirely account for. She'd said yes because of the wages. That was the reason she told herself. She was still telling herself that when she went to bed. In the days that followed, she began moving into the main house in careful, practical stages. Her few dresses were moved to the larger bedroom. A second chair appeared in the parlor, without either of them acknowledging it had been placed there deliberately. At supper, Hattie started setting 2 places at the head of the table instead of 1, and the ranch hands took this in with the focused incuriosity of men who valued their jobs. Noah and Evelyn practiced. It was nothing like what she'd expected. He didn't soften, didn't become warmer in some sudden rehearsed way. He sat across from her in the parlor after supper, with a list he'd actually written out, and they went through it with the grim efficiency of 2 people preparing testimony. "How long have you been married? 8 months. Where did you meet?" She traveled through Crestfall. She needed work. He offered it. Why no wedding announcement? We kept it private. Noah doesn't celebrate things publicly. That last item made Evelyn press her lips together to keep from saying something she'd regret. "What was your wife's name?" she asked. A beat. "Margaret." "Do you have a photograph somewhere visible in the house?" "In the bedroom." "That will need to be moved," she said. "Your father will want to see the bedroom. If there's a photograph of another woman, I'll move it," Noah said. His voice was careful, not cold. Careful the way you carry something fragile. "I'm sorry to ask." "You're doing your job," he said. "Don't apologize for it." She looked at him across the table in the lamplight. He had the face of a man who'd survived a war nobody had declared publicly, and he wore the survival the way soldiers sometimes do, not proudly, not mournfully, just continuously. "Is there anything else I should know?" she asked. "About your father, about what he's likely to push on." "He pushes on everything," Noah said. "He's a man who believes that pressure is how you find out what's real. He'll test you. He'll say something unkind to see how you respond. He'll compare you to—" He stopped. "To Margaret," Evelyn said. "Yes." "How should I respond?" Noah looked at his hands. Don't defend yourself, don't apologize, and don't try to compete with her." He paused. "She was a good woman. She deserves to be spoken about honestly. You won't win anything by making yourself seem more important." It was the first real thing he'd said about his dead wife in her presence. Evelyn felt it land in the room with a kind of weight that changed the temperature. "I wasn't planning to compete with anyone," she said quietly. Noah looked at her then, really looked the way he hadn't since the first night in the doorway. "No, I don't think you were." Outside, the Wyoming wind picked up. It knocked against the parlor window with the flat insistence of something that wanted in. Neither of them moved to address it. They sat in the particular quiet of two people discovering cautiously, and without wanting to, that they might be able to bear each other's company. Not yet trust, not yet warmth, but something they couldn't name yet and were both wise enough not to try. 6 days later, a wagon came up the main road to Blackstone Ranch. Hattie saw it from the kitchen window first and said one word: "Company." Evelyn was in the parlor finishing the mending she'd been using to keep her hands busy. She set it down, smoothed her dress, stood. Noah appeared in the hallway doorway. He'd changed into a clean shirt. His hair was combed. He looked for the first time since she'd met him, like a man bracing for something that frightened him. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. Something crossed his face that might have been in another man the beginning of a smile. "Neither am I." He crossed the parlor and stopped beside her. He was close enough that she could sense the particular tension running through him, the way a fence post feels right before a storm gets serious. "If they say something that makes you want to correct them," he said quietly, "I won't. If my father—" "I know." "Evelyn." He said her name for the first time. Not Miss Hayes, her name. "If this goes wrong, I want you to know it wasn't your doing." She met his eyes. "It won't go wrong." She turned and walked toward the front door. She put her hand on the knob. She opened it. And Evelyn Hayes, seamstress fugitive woman with no remaining good options, walked out onto the porch of Blackstone Ranch to meet the man whose dying wish might cost them everything. The wagon was still rolling toward them. From the passenger seat, she could see a white-haired man sitting upright despite the blanket across his lap, upright with the rigid dignity of someone who has never conceded anything to age and didn't intend to start now. Even from a distance, he looked like Noah. The shape of the jaw, the stillness, and beside him, a younger man with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes, already leaning out to look at the ranch with the specific hungry attention of someone doing arithmetic. That Evelyn understood was Silas. The wagon stopped. The white-haired man didn't wait for help getting down. He climbed from the wagon with slow, deliberate dignity, straightened himself to his full height, still impressive, still commanding, and looked at the ranch he'd given his son. Then he looked at Evelyn. His eyes were gray, sharp as sheared flint. "So," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried. "You're the woman my son was keeping secret." Beside her, she felt Noah go very still. Evelyn Hayes smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had survived worse than this. "I'm his wife," she said. "Evelyn Carter. I've been looking forward to meeting you." The old man studied her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he said, "We'll see." The week hadn't even started, and already nothing about this was going to be simple. Elias Carter was not a man who believed in anything he hadn't personally verified. He'd built his fortune that way, questioning every contract reading, every line of fine print, trusting no handshake until he'd looked the hand's owner in the eye long enough to see what they were hiding. He was 71 years old, dying of something the doctors called a progressive weakness of the heart, and he had not softened on the way down. If anything, the nearness of death had sharpened him, made him less patient with pretense. He looked at Evelyn for a long time on that porch. Then he walked past her into the house. "Show me the place," he said to Noah without looking back. "Then we'll eat, and then I'll have questions." Silas caught Evelyn's eye as he passed. He was younger than Noah by a decade, built slighter with a pleasant face that worked very hard at looking trustworthy. He smiled at her. It was the smile of a man who had already decided she wasn't a threat. That was his first mistake. His wife Clara. Small, quiet, dressed in clothes that cost more than anything Evelyn had owned in 3 years, touched Evelyn's elbow as she passed. "Don't mind Father," she said softly. "He does this to everyone." "I don't mind him," Evelyn said. Clara blinked. Then she moved inside. Hattie appeared at Evelyn's shoulder with the silent precision of a woman who had managed difficult visitors for 30 years. "I'll put supper on for 6, she said under her breath. "You just go be a wife." Evelyn straightened her spine and went to be a wife. The dining table held its own kind of battlefield. Elias sat at the far end where Noah usually sat, and nobody pointed out the problem with that. Noah took the chair to his father's left. Evelyn sat across from him to Elias's right, which put her directly in the old man's line of sight for the entire meal. Silas and Clara bracketed the middle. The lawyer, a thin man named Garrett, who'd been introduced and immediately forgotten, sat at the near end with a leather satchel he hadn't let go of since arriving. Hattie served a roast that was better than the occasion deserved. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was careful and performatively pleasant. The weather, the roads, how Elias was tolerating the travel. Then Elias set down his fork. 8 months, he said. Evelyn looked at him. That's how long apparently my son has been married without a single word to his family. He wasn't angry, which was somehow worse than anger. He was diagnostic. I'd like to understand that. We're private people, Noah said. You're a private person. You've been one since you were 8 years old and you decided I wasn't worth talking to. Elias didn't say it with cruelty, just with the wearying accuracy of someone reading from a document they've reviewed many times. I'm asking your wife. He looked at Evelyn. Every nerve in her body held very still while the rest of her stayed relaxed. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this. She knew what to say. She also knew that saying the prepared thing was exactly the wrong move because a man like Elias Carter had been hearing prepared things his whole life and could smell them from across a table. We didn't tell anyone, Evelyn said, because we weren't sure we deserved the celebration yet. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain that. Noah and I both came to this. She paused, choosing the word carefully, to each other already carrying significant loss. I didn't want to make an announcement that would invite comparisons or expectations that neither of us was ready to meet. She met the old man's eyes. I didn't want to be celebrated before I'd earned the right to stay. The table was very quiet. Silas looked at his plate. Clara was watching Evelyn with something that had shifted from polite attention to something more alert. Noah was very still. Elias studied Evelyn for a long moment with those flint-gray eyes, and she held his gaze without blinking, without performing, without smiling more than was natural. That's an honest answer, he said finally. He picked up his fork. I didn't expect that. I know, Evelyn said. Something moved across Elias Carter's face that she couldn't name. He returned to his roast. Under the table she felt Noah's hand find her wrist. Brief, barely there. The touch of a man who had run out of other ways to say thank you. He withdrew it in less than 2 seconds. She ate her supper and didn't look at him. Across the table, Silas watched all of it. His pleasant smile didn't change. That was the thing she noticed. It didn't change even slightly. The next morning came hard and fast the way mornings do when you haven't really slept. Evelyn was already in the kitchen when Noah came down, and she handed him coffee before he could ask, because she'd heard his boots on the stairs and timed it precisely. He took it. Didn't comment on the efficiency of that. Just drank. He wants to see the east pasture this morning, Noah said. The back acreage where the new grazing rotation is set up. Then you should take him. He asked if you'd come. Evelyn set down her own cup. Why? Because he wants to keep looking at you. Noah said it without inflection. He does that. He looks at things until they break or prove they won't. I won't break, she said. I know you won't. He said it like a fact he'd established already and moved on from. But I wanted to warn you anyway. He'll ask questions out there that he wouldn't ask at the dinner table. Personal questions. Things about your family, your past. He believes that how a person talks about where they came from tells him everything he needs to know about where they're going. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. What do I tell him about Chicago? As little as possible, and nothing that can be checked. She nodded. Evelyn. He said her name the same way he had on the porch the day before, not as an address, but as something he was being careful with. If there's something I need to know in case he asks something, I'm not asking what it is. I'm saying that if it would change how I handle this, now would be the time. She looked at him steadily. The kitchen around them was warm and smelled of coffee and last night's wood smoke, and the faint particular scent of a house that was slowly, reluctantly becoming lived in again. There's a man in Chicago, she said. His name is Richard Beaumont. His father owns half the commerce on the north side of the city. We were engaged. She paused. I left. He didn't take it well. He's been looking for me. She said all of it flatly, without self-pity. The way you state a weather condition you have no power to change. If his reach extends this far, which I don't think it does yet, and he found out I was here under your name, that could become a problem for you. Noah was very still. Does he have reason to believe you came west? He has reason to look everywhere, she said. He's that kind of man. What kind of man is that? The kind that doesn't lose things without deciding someone is at fault. The silence between them held everything that sentence implied. How long have you been running? He asked. 3 weeks when I knocked on your door. And before that? She held his gaze. Long enough to know how. Noah looked at her for a long moment with something she couldn't categorize. Not pity, not judgment, but a kind of recognition that sat lower and heavier than either. He set down his cup. He won't find you here, he said. And if he does, he'll have to deal with me first. It wasn't heroic. He didn't perform the words. He just said them the way he talked to that gray mare in the corral, quietly, certainly, without making promises he couldn't keep. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest that she immediately closed a door on. I'll get my coat, she said. The ride out to the east pasture was the longest stretch of time she'd spent near Elias Carter, and he made full use of it. He asked about her family. She kept it true and sparse. A farming family father died of fever when she was 16. Mother passed 2 years after. No siblings. She'd learned to sew from her mother and turned it into a trade. He asked where she'd met Noah. She told him the version they'd agreed on traveling through Crestfall, looking for work he'd offered it. Love at first sight? Elias asked, dry as chalk. No, Evelyn said. Respect first. Then trust. Then something that made the rest of it inevitable. Elias looked at his son. Noah was riding slightly ahead, talking to Tom about fence lines, his back to both of them. He doesn't talk about her, the old man said. He never did, not to me. Evelyn understood he meant Margaret. He talks about her to me, she said carefully. Does he? Not often, but when he does, it's he remembers her rightly, without making her into something she wasn't, and without making her smaller to make himself feel better. She paused. That takes a certain kind of character. Elias rode in silence for a moment. The horse beneath him moved steadily, patiently. He wasn't a strong rider anymore. She could see it in how carefully he held himself, but he rode like a man who refused to be reduced to a wagon. Do you know why I didn't write to him when she died? He said. Evelyn didn't answer. She waited. Because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't make it worse, Elias said. And I waited long enough that it became impossible, and then it became the thing between us. He said it without asking for sympathy, just noting it like a surveyor noting an inconvenient terrain feature. I made a mistake, and I didn't know how to correct it, so I made it into a policy instead. That's very honest, Evelyn said. I'm dying, he said. I don't have the time left to be dishonest. He looked at her then fully and directly the way he had at the dinner table. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Noah's first wife she was a bright, obvious beauty. Everyone could see immediately what she was and why he chose her. You're different." "Different how?" "You're careful," he said. "Everything you say you've thought about first. That's not a criticism. It's an observation. Careful people have usually had reasons to be." He looked back toward his son. "I just want to know you're here for the right reasons." Evelyn took a measured breath. "The right reasons for whom?" Elias looked at her sharply. "I mean that honestly," she said. "Your right reasons, and Noah's might not be the same, and mine are mine. The question is whether they're causing harm." She met his eyes. "Are they?" A long beat. Then Elias Carter made a sound that took her a moment to identify as a short, genuine laugh. "Lord," he said. "He actually went and found someone who talks back to me." He nudged his horse forward. Evelyn released the breath she'd been holding. That evening, Silas found her alone in the kitchen garden. She heard him coming the particular crunch of someone who didn't spend time outdoors and hadn't learned to move quietly in it. She kept her hands in the soil and didn't look up. "Quite a performance last night at dinner," he said. "I'm sorry. With Father. The whole, I didn't want to be celebrated before I earned the right to stay. Very well done." He said it pleasantly, the way he said everything, with that same easy smile that never quite connected to his eyes. "Where'd you pick that up, Theodore?" Evelyn stood and brushed soil from her palms. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He moved closer, not aggressively, but in the casual way of a man accustomed to taking up space he hasn't been offered. "I've done some asking around town. Nobody in Crestfall knows Noah has a wife. Not the feed store, not the bank, not the post office where he picks up his mail." He tilted his head. 8 months is a long time to keep a secret in a small county. "We're private people," she said. The same words Noah had used. "Right," Silas smiled. "Here's what I think. I think you appeared here recently. I think Noah needed something, and you provided it. And I think the two of you have a tidy little agreement that doesn't bear much examination." He paused. "I think my father is being played by two people who are smarter than they're pretending to be." Evelyn looked at him. She had known men like Silas. Not many, but enough. Men for whom pleasantness was a weapon, not a feature. Men who kept the smile in place because it made you lower your guard. "You're afraid," she said. He blinked. "You're afraid your father is going to sign the land to Noah regardless, because he can see that Noah actually runs this place and all your scheming with lawyers is going to come to nothing." She kept her voice perfectly even. "So you're trying to find the crack in the wall before the ink dries." Silas's smile held, but something behind it tightened. "I'm just asking questions," he said. "Ask them to Noah," she said. "This is his ranch and his family. I'm just his wife." She picked up her gardening basket. "Supper's at 6. I'd wash up before then. Hattie doesn't like mud tracked through the kitchen." She walked past him. Her heart was moving faster than she wanted it to. She controlled her pace and didn't show it. Inside the barn, out of sight, she stopped walking and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Silas knew, or suspected enough that the difference was irrelevant. And a man like that didn't sit on information, he used it. She needed to tell Noah. But telling Noah meant admitting how close to the edge they were, and she wasn't sure he could stay steady with that knowledge, and the rest of it pressing on him simultaneously. She'd handle Silas herself. She made that decision in the quiet of the barn, with her jaw set and her hands finally still. She'd handle it herself. What she didn't anticipate was the county dance. It was the first Saturday of the month, something the hands had mentioned in passing. Nothing mandatory, just the regular gathering at the Halverson barn 3 miles east, where Crestfall's community met and ate and listened to music, and reminded itself it was a community. Elias, to everyone's surprise, declared he wanted to go. He said it was because he hadn't heard a fiddle in 2 years. Evelyn suspected it was because he wanted to see Noah and his wife in public, which meant they were going. She wore the best dress she owned. Dark blue wool plain, but cut well, the one she'd kept carefully folded at the bottom of her satchel through 3 weeks of travel. She'd let her hair down and pinned it back, simply the way her mother had taught her. Noah saw her in the hallway and stopped walking. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Will I do?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Careful, controlled. You'll do." They rode together on the bench seat of the ranch wagon, Noah and Evelyn in front, Elias and the lawyer Garrett behind Silas and Clara in their own rented rig following. The night was clear and cold. The stars over Wyoming dense enough to seem structural, like they were holding the sky up. "You spoke to Silas today," Noah said quietly, low enough that it didn't carry back to his father. "He came to me." "What did he say?" She told him, quickly, plainly. She felt Noah's hands tighten on the reins, but his face stay composed. "He can't prove anything," Noah said. "He doesn't need proof. He needs to plant enough doubt in your father's mind before the week is out." A silence. "He won't." "He's going to try." She kept her voice low. "He's not going to confront us directly. He's smarter than that. He'll plant questions, small things, inconsistencies." "Then we don't give him inconsistencies." "Noah." She said his name without thinking. "He's already suspicious. What we need to do is give your father something stronger to hold on to than Silas's suspicions." Noah looked at her briefly. In the dark, with the stars overhead, she couldn't entirely read his expression. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop managing this from a distance." She held his gaze. "Your father watches how you look at me, how you move near me. Right now you're careful. You're doing what you do with everything. You're surviving it. But surviving isn't the same as living, and your father knows that distinction better than anyone." She paused. "At that dance tonight, you need to look like a man who chose me, not like a man who's enduring me." The wagon rolled on. "Can you do that?" she asked. Noah Carter was quiet for a long time. "I'll try," he said. The Halverson barn was warm and loud and smelled of sawdust and pine resin and good cooking. Fiddles were already going when they arrived, and the floor was moving with couples of all ages, from children who'd given up pretending to sleep to grandparents who moved with the patient ease of people who'd been dancing together for 40 years. Elias was greeted by 3 men his age who clearly remembered him, and he was absorbed into their company immediately with the natural authority of someone who'd once been the largest presence in any room he entered. That left Noah and Evelyn standing near the door. She felt the moment stretch. Then Noah held out his hand. Not formally. Not with the stiff courtesy of an arrangement being executed. He held it out the way a man extends a hand to something real, simply without announcement. She took it. They danced. It was not elegant. Neither of them had much practice, and the fiddle was moving fast. But Noah didn't let go, and she didn't pull away. And after the first minute, something eased between them that had been braced tight since the week began. He was less graceful than he was steady. He moved like a man who understood weight and balance from a lifetime of physical work, and that translated in its own rough way into something she could follow. "You're counting under your breath," he said. "I'm not." "You absolutely are." She almost laughed. He almost smiled. Across the room, Elias watched them from between his contemporaries, and Silas, leaning against the far wall with a cup in his hand, watched Elias watch them. An hour into the evening, Evelyn slipped outside for air. She didn't hear the man behind her until he was already close. "Evelyn?" The voice wasn't Silas. It wasn't anyone from the ranch. She turned. The man standing in the shadows beyond the barn door was someone she recognized with the particular sick lurch of the stomach that your body reserves for things it was hoping never to see again. He was a hired man. She didn't know his name, but she recognized the cut of his coat, the pin on his lapel. Richard Beaumont's family used 3 or 4 of them. Investigators, they were called politely. "Mr. Beaumont would like to know you're safe," the man said. "He's been worried." Every part of her went cold and very clear. "Tell him," she said carefully, "that he has the wrong woman." "Now, Miss Hayes?" "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said. and this is Blackstone Ranch land, which you are standing on without invitation." She kept her voice level. She did not take a single step backward. "If you're not gone in the next 2 minutes, the men who work this land will make sure of it." The man smiled the way men smile when they're used to women being smaller than their situations require. "You've put yourself in a complicated position, Miss Hayes. Mr. Beaumont is a patient man, but—" "Evelyn." Noah's voice came from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him follow. He was simply there the way a wall is simply there when you need it, not announced, just present. He looked at the man with the expression he used on animals that had entered his property without being invited and were contemplating whether to make a problem of it. Flat. Absolute. "This man bothering you?" "He was just leaving," Evelyn said. The investigator looked at Noah Carter the size of him. The quality of the stillness he carried, the particular way a man stands on land. He's built himself and made the decision. Smart men make when their arithmetic comes out correctly. "My mistake," the investigator said. "Wrong person." He walked away. Noah didn't move until the man was out of sight. Then he turned to her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before, not protectiveness exactly. Or not just that. Something older and more complicated. "That was Beaumont's man," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "He found you." "He found me." She kept her voice even. "Which means Richard knows I'm in this county. He doesn't know exactly where yet, or he'd have come himself." "Yet," Noah repeated. "Yet," she confirmed. They stood in the cold outside the barn, the music rolling out through the walls, the sound of other people's ordinary happiness surrounding them like weather. "He's going to come," Noah said. "Probably. And when he does, I'll handle it," she said. "Evelyn." His voice dropped, roughened at the edge in a way she was starting to recognize the sound of the door in his chest, moving in its frame. "You're not handling it alone." She looked at him. He looked at her. And the thing neither of them named sat there between them, patient and insistent, the way the truest things always are, waiting for the right moment, or the right breaking point, or both. Inside, the fiddle shifted to something slower. "We should go back in," Evelyn said. "Yeah," Noah said. He didn't move immediately. "We should." Then he reached out and, without fanfare or declaration, tucked her cold hand into the crook of his arm. He walked her inside. And Elias Carter, watching from across the room as they came through the door together, the way his son moved his hand briefly to the small of her back, the way she turned toward him without being directed, saw something in his son's face he hadn't seen in 3 years. Not happiness. Not yet. Something earlier than that. Something that lives in the ground before the first growth shows. The old man turned back to his friends and said nothing. But his jaw was less tight than it had been all week. And across the room, Silas saw his father's face and understood that his window was narrowing. He set down his cup. He was going to have to move faster than he'd planned. Silas moved on Sunday. He did it the way he did everything, pleasantly, without appearing to move at all. He came down to breakfast early and complimented Hattie's biscuits and asked Elias gentle questions about the land deed timeline. He did not look at Evelyn directly. He didn't need to. What he did instead was mention in the easy conversational tone of a man sharing nothing important that he'd bumped into someone at the dance the previous night. A man passing through the county on business. Interesting fellow, said he was looking for a woman matching a particular description. Someone who'd left Chicago under complicated circumstances. He said it to Elias, not to Noah, not to Evelyn. To Elias over biscuits while Evelyn was pouring coffee 3 feet away with her back to the table. Her hand didn't shake. She was proud of that later. Elias said in the tone of a man who'd filed something and wasn't ready to open it yet. Strange thing to bring up at breakfast. Just thought it was interesting, Silas said. All kinds of people moving through Wyoming these days. Evelyn set the coffee pot down. She turned. She looked at Silas, the way you look at a card that's just been placed face up on the table, seeing it clearly, calculating what it changes. Then she looked at Elias. Your younger son is trying to tell you I'm not who I say I am, she said, pleasantly, without heat. He's been working toward it since he arrived. I thought you should know he's arrived. The table went completely silent. Silas's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted fast. Elias set down his coffee cup. He looked at Silas, then at Evelyn, then back at Silas with the particular expression of a man whose patience has been specifically tested in a specific way he recognizes. "Silas," he said, "if you have something to say it plainly." Silas recalibrated in real time. She could see it, the quick internal adjustment of a man deciding which version of himself to deploy. "I'm just saying there are questions worth asking, Father. About her background, about the timing of their marriage, about why nobody in this county knew Noah had a wife until we arrived. Because I didn't advertise my personal life to anyone who'd use it as ammunition," Noah said from the doorway. He'd been there for at least 30 seconds. Evelyn hadn't heard him come in. Apparently neither had Silas, which was evident from the slight involuntary stiffening across his shoulders. Noah walked to the table and sat down. He reached across and took Evelyn's hand where it rested near the coffee pot. Not gently, not demonstratively, just plainly, the way you take hold of something that belongs near you. He looked at his father. "You want to ask me something, directly ask it. But if Silas has concerns about my wife, he can take them to the road." Elias looked at his son's hand covering Evelyn's. He looked at it for a long time. "Nobody's taking anything to any road," he said finally. "We're going to finish breakfast." He picked up his biscuit. "Silas, if you have evidence of something, put it on the table. If you don't, I'd suggest you stop speculating at my expense." Silas opened his mouth. "At my expense," Elias repeated in a tone that closed the discussion the way a vault closes. Silas closed his mouth. Under the table, Evelyn felt Noah's thumb press briefly against her knuckles, barely there, gone in a second. She didn't look at him. She reached for her own coffee and drank it and said nothing. The meal finished in strained quiet. It was Clara who found Evelyn afterward in the hallway near the linen cupboard, where Evelyn had gone to do something with her hands. "He's going to push harder," Clara said. She kept her voice low. Her expression was complicated, not unkind, but not simple either. "Silas, I mean. When he decides something is worth having, he doesn't stop." "I know," Evelyn said. Clara looked at her carefully. "You're not afraid of him." "I've met men like him before." "Not like Silas specifically," Clara said. She stopped, started differently. "He's been waiting for this land for a long time. He thinks he deserves it because he's never been given anything else. Our father spent his whole life comparing the two of them, and Noah always—" She stopped again, looked at the wall. Noah always won without trying, which Silas never forgave, and Noah never noticed. She looked back at Evelyn. "I'm telling you this because I think you're smart enough to use it, and because I am tired," she said plainly, "of watching my husband make himself into something small and mean over a piece of land that was never going to be his anyway." Then she walked away. Evelyn stood in the hallway for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then she went to find Noah. She found him at the corral. He was watching Tom work the gray mare who had finally stopped fighting the lead and was moving in clean, responsive circles. A month of patience paying out in one quiet morning. Evelyn stopped beside him at the fence. "Clara just warned me about Silas." "Clara married him anyway," Noah said. "She's got a complicated view of things. She said he's going to move harder." Evelyn paused. "And she said something about your father comparing the two of you." Noah watched the mare. "My father spent 30 years wishing I was more like Silas. Easier to read, less likely to shut a door and not open it again." He was quiet for a moment. "After Margaret died, Silas was the one who called, the one who came. Silas sat in this kitchen and said the right things and brought food and acted like a brother." His jaw tightened. "It took me 2 years to understand that he was cataloging." "What do you mean?" "He was learning what I had, how much, what condition it was in, what it would take to acquire it. He said it without rage, just with the specific tired clarity of a man who has finished grieving a thing he should never have trusted. Grief makes you stupid, makes you let people in without checking what they're carrying. Evelyn was quiet. He came to you first, Noah said. It wasn't a question. The garden, second day. And last night he went to my father. Yes. Noah finally looked at her. The morning light was direct, and in it she could see more of his face than she usually caught the lines around his eyes that weren't from squinting at sun, but from carrying weight in his sleep. He's not going to stop, he said. Not unless something stops him. What would stop him? My father signing the deed before the week is out. Noah looked back at the mayor. Which means we need my father to believe completely, and without reservation, that this marriage is real. The word real sat between them, doing a specific kind of work. He's close, Evelyn said carefully. Your father. He wants to believe it. He wants to believe I'm not broken, Noah said. That's different. She looked at the side of his face. At the way he held himself at the fence arms folded on the top rail weight forward, the posture of someone who'd learned to brace against the world by making himself part of whatever structure was nearest. Are you? She asked. He turned to look at her. Broken, she said. Are you? Noah was quiet long enough that it wasn't really a silence anymore. It was an answer in a different form. I don't know, he said finally. I know I'm still here. I know the ranch is still standing. I don't know if that's the same thing as not being broken or just what broken looks like when it keeps moving. It was the most he'd said about himself in all the days she'd been here. She didn't make much of it, didn't respond with comfort or sympathy, or the careful language of someone managing a fragile thing. For what it's worth, she said, broken things still work. Sometimes better than before, depending on what broke. He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to the mayor. We'll get through this week, he said. Yes, she agreed. And then what we agreed, she said. He nodded. Neither of them said anything else. The mayor made a clean circle, and Tom gave a low, satisfied sound, and the morning kept moving. Richard Beaumont arrived on Wednesday. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared at the front gate of Blackstone Ranch in a rented carriage with 2 men beside him and a third on the driver's box, and he walked to the front door with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never in his life been told he wasn't allowed somewhere. Evelyn heard the knock from the parlor where she was sewing one of Elias's shirts that had lost a button. She heard Hattie answer. She heard a voice she hadn't heard in 3 weeks but had been hearing in her sleep the entire time. She set down the shirt very carefully. She set down the needle. She stood. She walked to the parlor doorway. Richard Beaumont was exactly as she remembered him, which was, she realized, the most frightening thing about him. He hadn't changed. He was tall, well-dressed, with the burnished confidence of someone whose family had been telling him he was exceptional since before he could form a coherent thought. He had a handsome face, and he knew it, and the knowing had calcified over the years into something that lived just behind his eyes, like a tax everyone around him was expected to pay. He saw her. He smiled. There she is, he said, warm, easy, as if she were a misplaced item that had been recovered. Evelyn, you gave us quite a chase. You should leave, she said. I've come all this way. You should leave immediately. He stepped inside without being invited. Hattie moved back, and Evelyn hated the fact of it, the way his presence made space rearrange itself around him. I've only come to talk, he said. Your family is worried. Everyone who cares about you. There's no one in your circle who cares about me, she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that too. Get out of this house. Evelyn. He moved toward her, not aggressively, not yet. Just the slow, casual approach of a man who expected things to go his way by default. I know you're frightened. I know the way things ended was, get out of my house. Noah's voice came from the back hallway, low and absolute, cutting through the room with the particular authority of a man addressing something on his own land. He walked in and stopped between Evelyn and Richard Beaumont and didn't say anything else. He just stood there. Richard looked at him. The assessment was fast and practiced the way men like Richard Beaumont assess physical threats with the quick calculation of someone who has always paid others to deal with them. "You must be the husband," he said. "I am," Noah said. "I'm an old friend of Evelyn's from Chicago, Richard Beaumont." He offered his hand. Noah didn't take it. Richard withdrew it without acknowledging the slight. "I've come to make sure she's all right." Her departure was sudden. There were people concerned for her well-being. "She looks well to me," Noah said. "And she asked you to leave." "I understand, this looks—" "She asked you to leave," Noah said again. Same tone, same finality. The repetition wasn't anger, it was the sound of a man who says things once and means them, and is now accounting for the fact that someone didn't understand. Richard looked at Evelyn over Noah's shoulder. The warmth had retreated now, leaving something colder in its place. "We have unfinished business, Evelyn. That doesn't go away because you crossed a state line." "There is no business," she said. "The engagement was ended. Everything of yours was returned. You have no claim." "You signed a contract," he said. "A contract I signed under conditions I will be happy to explain in detail to any court in this country." Something moved across Richard's face. Not anger control reasserting itself. The particular expression of a man deciding this conversation is not going the way he'd planned and recalculating. "I see," he said. "You've gotten brave." "I've been brave," she said. "I just didn't know it yet, when I was near you." The silence in the room was very specific. Richard straightened his coat. "I'll be staying in Crestfall," he said, the pleasantness restored like a mask slipped back into place. "I have some business to attend to in the county. I'm sure we'll see each other again before I leave." He looked at Noah. "She's a remarkable woman. I hope you understand what you have." He left. The door closed. Hattie stood by the kitchen entrance with a cast-iron pan in her hand, and Evelyn thought with the hysterical clarity that sometimes follows fear that the cook had been prepared to use it. Noah turned. He looked at Evelyn for a moment. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "Mostly true." "What contract?" She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. His family's lawyer drew up a betrothal agreement that included a financial penalty clause if I ended the engagement without his family's consent. She kept her voice even. "The penalty was designed to be unpayable on my income. It was meant to make leaving impossible." Noah was very still. "What happened when you left?" "I left anyway," she said. "And I've been waiting for him to find me and present the contract to whatever court would listen." She looked at Noah directly. "He won't take me back to Chicago against my will. That's not what this is. This is about money and about the fact that no one leaves Richard Beaumont without being made to regret it publicly." "He said he has business in the county," Noah said. "He doesn't have business in this county," Evelyn said. "He has Silas." The word landed in the room like a stone. Noah looked at her. "Think about the timing," she said. "Silas knew we were coming to the dance. Silas spoke to someone at the dance who matched Richard's investigator. Richard arrives 2 days later." She held his gaze. "Your cousin contacted him." Noah turned and walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment with his back to her, and she let him have it, because some things need to be understood in private before they can be dealt with publicly. "He'd sell the ranch to a mining company inside of a year," Noah said, very quietly, not to her, just to the fact of it. "Yes," she said. "My father built this place. My grandfather worked this territory before there was a county here." He turned. His face had the look of a decision being made somewhere behind his eyes in a room she couldn't see into. "We are not losing this land." "No," she said. "We're not." He looked at her. "I have to tell my father about Silas." "Yes." "He won't believe it easily." "He'll believe you," Evelyn said, "because unlike Silas, you've never wanted anything from him except to be left in peace. And he knows that. He's known it his whole life, and it's been eating at him, and now's his chance to account for it." Noah looked at her for a long moment. "When did you figure all this out?" he asked. Clara told me the outline, she said. I filled in the rest. He shook his head slowly, not in dismissal, but in the specific way of someone recalibrating their understanding of a person they thought they'd already measured. He went to find his father. The conversation between Noah and Elias happened behind the closed door of the study and lasted 40 minutes. Evelyn sat in the kitchen with Hattie, who made coffee she didn't drink, and they didn't speak because Hattie was a woman who understood that some silences needed company, but not noise. When Elias came out, his face was the color of old ash. He walked through the kitchen without stopping. He went to find Silas. That conversation lasted 7 minutes and was not quiet. Silas denied everything with smooth, practiced fluency, and then when the denial failed against his father's specific knowledge of what had been said, to whom and when, shifted to justification. He said he was protecting the family legacy. He said Noah wasn't thinking clearly. He said a man who hid his marriage for 8 months and hired a woman off the road to play his wife. He stopped. He'd said it. In front of Elias, in front of Clara, in the hallway outside the kitchen, where Evelyn stood in the doorway, having heard all of it. In front of Noah, who had come down the back stairs and was standing at the end of the hallway. The silence that followed was total. Silas looked at Evelyn, at Noah, at his father. He'd played his final card and he knew it had broken wrong. "Get your things," Elias said. His voice was very quiet. That was always when it was most dangerous. "You and your wife will leave before supper. Father, if you say another word, I will add a condition to the deed that prevents you from ever setting foot on this property again." He said it without raising his voice. "I have grounds, and you know I do. Now go pack." Silas went. Clara caught Evelyn's eye as she passed, and in Clara's expression was something exhausted and resigned, and quietly relieved all at once, and she walked upstairs without saying anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Elias turned. He looked at Evelyn for a long time, then at Noah. "How much of it?" he asked. "The beginning," Noah said. "She got here 11 days before you did, and she had nowhere to go, and I needed—" He stopped, started differently. "I needed someone, and it started as an arrangement." "And now?" Elias asked. Noah didn't answer immediately. Evelyn looked at the floor. "I see," Elias said. He put one hand on the wall beside him for a moment, steadying himself in the way sick men do when they've been pushed further than their bodies budgeted for. "So what I've been watching all week is two people pretending to be in love while actually beginning to fall into it." "Father, don't explain it to me," Elias said. "I'm old and I'm dying, but I'm not blind." He looked at Evelyn directly. "He still needs the land signed properly. That part of this was always real, but the question now is whether you're leaving after." Evelyn raised her head. "I don't know," she said honestly. Elias considered this. Then, with the specific air of a man settling something that has been unsettled too long, he turned and walked toward the study. "I'll speak to Garrett in the morning," he said over his shoulder, "about the deed." He paused at the doorway. Without turning. "Noah, she doesn't feel like pretend." Then he was gone. The hallway held the particular silence of a verdict still finding its shape. Evelyn became aware that she and Noah were the only ones left in it. She didn't look at him. "That's not how I expected that to go," she said. "No," he agreed. "He's going to sign the deed." "Seems like." "Which means the arrangement is resolved," he said. "Yes." She nodded, kept her eyes somewhere to the left of him. "That's good. That's what you needed." "Evelyn." She looked up. He was closer than she'd registered. Close enough that she could see the specific tension in his jaw, the particular quality of stillness that meant he was working through something difficult in real time. "Richard is still in Crestfall," he said. "I know. He's going to do something before he leaves. He's not the kind of man who accepts nothing. I know that too. When he does." Noah stopped, looked at something just past her shoulder, then back at her. I want you to know that whatever happens, you don't have to handle it the way you've been handling everything. Alone." He paused. "That's not a condition. That's not part of the arrangement. That's just—" He seemed to run out of the vocabulary for it. "I want you to know." The house creaked around them in the way old houses creak, settling, breathing, adjusting to the weight of the people inside it. "Why?" she asked. The question was smaller than she intended. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the barn doorway, on her first night, cataloging, measuring, but different now. Not assessing whether she was trouble, trying to understand something that wouldn't cooperate with analysis. "I don't know," he said. "I've been trying to figure that out." She held his gaze. He held hers. And neither of them moved, because moving would make the thing between them require a name, and neither of them was ready for that yet. The Blackstone Harvest Festival was Saturday. It was the event the entire county treated as the official end of the working season, the day everyone came down off their land and reminded themselves that other people existed and that existing together was on balance a good thing. There were competitions and cooking and a bonfire that got started at dusk and went until someone's grandmother decided it was unreasonable. Elias insisted on attending. He also insisted on Evelyn sitting beside him in the main gathering, which she understood was his way of making something official without saying it in so many words. What none of them anticipated was Richard Beaumont walking into the middle of it. He arrived at the festival in full view of half the county, with the deliberate timing of a man who had chosen his audience carefully. He was dressed well, he was unhurried, and he had a folded document in his breast pocket that he produced at the moment of maximum visibility, when the crowd was densest, when Elias Carter was present, when the county's gossips were closest. He walked directly to where Evelyn stood near the main tables. "I have the contract," he said loud enough to carry. "Witnessed and notarized in Chicago. I'm prepared to file it with the county clerk first thing Monday." He opened it. "Or Evelyn can come back with me now, and we settle this privately." The crowd had gone quiet with the focused attention of people who understand they're watching something important happen. "She's not going anywhere," Noah said, moving to stand beside her. "This is a legal matter," Richard said. "The contract was signed under duress," Evelyn said. Her voice was loud enough for the crowd, and she meant it to be. By a woman who had been isolated from her friends, her finances, and every person who might have counseled her against it. "That contract is worth exactly what you paid for it, Richard, which is nothing, because that's the value of anything built on coercion." "Big words," Richard said. His pleasantness had gone. What was underneath it was colder and harder than the pleasant version. From a woman who ran from her obligations and hid in another man's house pretending to be his wife. The word pretending landed like a match. The crowd stirred. Evelyn felt the color rise in her face. Felt the specific weight of a public moment falling apart, all the careful work of the past week. The performances, the conversations, the small accumulating evidence of something real, all of it suddenly exposed at its most fragile seam. "She came to my son," Elias Carter said. He'd stood up. That alone stopped everything, the old man with his wool blanket and his doctor nearby, and the visible cost of standing on his feet in the middle of the festival crowd. "She came to my son's house with nothing but her own capability and her own courage, and she's been running his household and working his land and doing it better than anyone he's had in 3 years. He looked at Richard. "You say she ran from her obligations. All I see is a woman who ran from someone who had no business owning any obligation of hers in the first place." Richard's face was very controlled. "With respect, Mr. Carter, this is a legal—" "I know what a legal matter looks like," Elias said. "I've been in business for 50 years, and I know what this looks like too. This looks like a man who's embarrassed chasing a woman across 2 states to recover something he was never entitled to." He turned to the crowd, not performing, just stating. "The Carter family has been in this county for 30 years. I'd ask my neighbors to weigh what they see accordingly." He sat back down. The crowd's silence had shifted from curious to weighted. Richard looked at Evelyn. The coldness in him was fully visible now, the thing the pleasantness had been sitting in front of the whole time. "This isn't over," he said. quiet enough that only the nearest people heard. Not by a long way. Actually, Evelyn said just as quietly, "It is." She reached into her coat pocket. "Because I've been carrying this since I left Chicago." She produced a folded letter. "This is a statement from a woman named Helen Marsh, who was engaged to you 3 years before me, witnessed by her attorney, documenting conditions that match mine in enough detail that any judge in this country would be interested." She held it up, not to him, to the air between them. "And I have 2 more names, both willing to speak." Richard's face went very still. "I didn't want to use this," she said. "I hoped you'd simply leave." She folded the letter, put it back. "I hope you'll leave now." The festival held its collective breath. Richard Beaumont looked at Evelyn Hayes, at the woman he had controlled and diminished and searched 3 states for, and saw for the first time something his arithmetic had never accounted for. Not just courage. Preparation. The cold patient carefully assembled evidence of a woman who had known this day was coming and had built something to meet it with. He buttoned his coat. He walked away. He didn't look back. The crowd exhaled. Evelyn stood in the middle of the festival with her heart slamming against her ribs and her face composed and the absolute certainty that her legs were about to stop cooperating. Then she felt a hand at her back. Noah's hand, brief and steady, the same way he'd walked her into the barn dance, and she found her footing again. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with that expression she still didn't have a full name for. Something older than surprise and deeper than admiration. 3 names, he said. 3 women he did it to, she said. I found them through letters. It took 4 months and a lot of bad roads. Her voice was steady. I wasn't just running Noah, I was building. He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly he said, I know. And the hand at her back stayed there warm and certain, while the festival came back to life around them. The music starting again, the conversations resuming, the bonfire beginning its slow climb against the darkening sky. She should have moved. She didn't. Neither did he. And the line that had been thinning for 11 days between what was performance and what was real finished disappearing entirely without ceremony in the middle of a Wyoming harvest festival, while neither of them said a word about it. The festival ended late. By the time the bonfire had burned down to serious coals and the fiddle players had exhausted their repertoire twice over. Most of Crestfall had gone home carrying something to talk about that wasn't crops or weather. Noah Carter's wife had faced down a Chicago businessman in front of half the county, and old Elias Carter had stood up from his sick chair to back her, and the whole thing had the texture of a story that would be repeated at tables across the county for years. What nobody saw was what happened after. Noah drove the wagon home in the dark with Evelyn beside him, and Elias bundled in the back with his doctor, already half asleep, against the exhaustion that serious illness levies on a body that has pushed past its budget. The road was quiet. The night was cold and clear. The silence between Noah and Evelyn had the particular quality of something full rather than something empty, like a room after everyone has finally said what needed saying. They were a mile from the ranch when Evelyn spoke. You should have let me handle it myself, she said. I didn't do anything, he said. My father did. You put your hand on my back. That's not doing anything. It is, she said. To me, it is. He kept his eyes on the road. The horses knew the way and didn't need direction, which was good, because he wasn't entirely certain his attention was functioning correctly. I know what I said at the beginning, Evelyn said. About the arrangement, about leaving after. I remember. I want you to know that I meant it when I said it. She paused. And I don't know what I mean now. And I'm not asking you to make anything of that. I'm just telling you the honest state of things, because you've been honest with me about most of yours, and I think you deserve the same. Noah was quiet for a moment. What did he do to you? He asked. Beaumont. Not the legal things, the other things. She looked at her hands in her lap. He made himself necessary, she said. Slowly, so gradually that by the time I understood what had happened, everything that was mine, my money, my friendships, my work, my sense of what I was capable of, had been routed through him, so that leaving felt like trying to survive an amputation. She paused. It took me 6 months to understand that surviving an amputation was still surviving. The wagon rolled on. After Margaret. Noah said the name coming out carefully, the way he always said it, like something fragile that had become sturdy through handling. I did the same thing in reverse. I made myself unnecessary to everyone. Sent people away. Stopped answering letters. Turned the ranch into a reason not to be a person anymore. He exhaled. It's a different kind of same thing. Evelyn looked at him. I know, she said. He finally looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, his face had none of its usual composed surface. Just the actual thing underneath which was tired and honest and more alive than she'd ever seen it. Don't leave yet, he said. That's all I'm asking. Just don't leave yet. She held his gaze in the dark. Okay, she said. He looked back at the road. The horses kept moving. And somewhere behind them, Elias Carter was not, as they believed, fully asleep. He lay with his eyes closed and his hands folded over the wool blanket and let the quiet tell him what it knew. He'd spent the last 30 years being the kind of father who taught by pressure and withdrew his warmth as a lesson, and believed that difficulty was the same as love, if applied with enough consistency. He'd watched his son close like a fist after Margaret died, and told himself Noah just needed time, and then told himself Noah had had enough time, and then stopped asking, because it had become too uncomfortable to ask, and too easy to let Silas fill the space with his easier company and his easier answers. He understood now at 71, with his heart failing in the specific way it was failing a very long series of mistakes that he had dressed up as policies. He listened to his son ask a woman not to leave. He listened to her say, okay. He kept his eyes closed and let the night carry them all home. 2 days later, Richard Beaumont made his final move. He was whatever else could be said about him, not a man who accepted a public loss and walked away from it quietly. He'd been humiliated at that festival, in front of people whose opinions he didn't care about, by a woman he'd spent months hunting. And the particular injury of it to his pride, to his sense of how the world was ordered, required a response. He found the response in a 12-year-old debt. Noah's father had borrowed money during a bad drought season, when Blackstone Ranch was 2 years from collapse, and Elias had taken a private loan from a merchant bank in Denver rather than admit the difficulty publicly. The loan had been repaid mostly, but a remaining balance had been traded between creditors over the intervening years in the way that financial instruments move when nobody's watching them carefully. It had ended up through a chain of transactions that was either coincidental or not in a holding company that Richard Beaumont had quietly acquired 3 weeks before he arrived in Wyoming. The notice arrived at Blackstone Ranch by Tuesday morning courier. Full repayment demanded within 30 days. Failure to comply would trigger a lien on the property deed. Noah read it at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he set it down and sat with it for a full minute without moving. Hattie put coffee in front of him. She didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that the coffee wasn't already saying. Evelyn came in from the garden and saw his face and picked up the notice and read it. He had this ready, she said. Before he came here. He knew about the debt. Silas, Noah said. Silas told him what to look for, she said. And he had the money and the time to find it. 30 days. Noah pressed both hands flat on the table. The fall cattle sale brings in enough to cover maybe half. The rest? How much is the rest? He told her the number. She nodded slowly, not frightened, calculating. He's not going to take it to a judge, she said. He doesn't want to take you to court. He wants to take the ranch, or he wants to humiliate you publicly, or he wants you to come to him and negotiate so that he has something to tell people about when he goes back to Chicago. Some version of winning. He's not getting any of those things, Noah said. No, she agreed. He's not. She sat down across from him. What do you actually need? What do you mean? I mean, what's the real problem? Not the legal surface of it, the actual obstacle. He looked at the notice. I need the money. Or I need the debt instrument challenged, which requires a lawyer, which requires money I also don't have in a hurry. What about your neighbors? He looked at her. You've been here 15 years, she said. Your hands have families in this county. Tom's been here 11 years. The Halverson family hosted the festival on land that backs up to yours. She leaned forward slightly. You've been running this ranch like an island, Noah. You've been running yourself like an island. You're not. You're a part of something. Let it be a part of you. I don't ask people for... I know you don't, she said. That's the thing that's going to end you if you don't change it. He was quiet. You stood in front of that festival crowd 2 days ago, she said. They saw what kind of man you are. Let them choose to stand beside it. Noah looked at his hands. Then at the notice. Then at Evelyn, who was watching him with the patient, clear-eyed certainty of someone who had decided she believed in this place more than she'd believed in anything in a long time. I don't know how to ask, he said. Start with Tom, she said. He'll know the rest. Tom Briggs had been with Noah Carter so long that he'd stopped thinking about it in terms of employment and started thinking about it in terms of something closer to geography. He was part of Blackstone Ranch, the way the East Fence was part of Blackstone Ranch, just there, solid, not requiring explanation. When Noah found him in the barn that afternoon and laid out the situation with the particular uncomfortable directness of a man who has decided that pride is the least useful thing he owns. Tom listened from start to finish without interrupting. Then he said, How much? Noah told him. Tom scratched the back of his neck. The Halversons lost their west pasture to a debt collection 6 years back. They've been sore about it since. Jim Halverson's talked about forming a county protection agreement 3 times, never got enough people organized. He looked at Noah. You ask him to organize it now with a reason this specific and this immediate, he'll have 12 names by supper. I'm not asking for charity, Noah said. You're not getting charity, Tom said. You're getting neighbors. There's a difference. Charity is what you give when you don't expect anything back. Neighbors is what you do when you know that what helps you helps everyone eventually. He stood. I'll ride out to Halverson's this afternoon. You write out the legal specifics, clean and clear so he can show people exactly what we're dealing with. Noah looked at him. You should have been talking to people for 3 years, Tom said without judgment, just as an observation. But now works too. He went to saddle his horse. Evelyn, who had been listening from the barn door, walked in when Tom left and stopped a few feet from Noah. See, she said. He let out a breath that had been holding since Tuesday morning. Don't be smug about it. I'm not smug, she said. I'm right. Those are different. He looked at her with an expression that had somewhere in the past week stopped being cataloging and become something else entirely. Something that arrived without calculation and stayed without announcement. I'm going to speak to my father, he said. Today, before I talk to anyone else. She nodded. I should have done it 3 years ago, he said. When she died. I should have called him and said I should have said something. Instead of... He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. I turned it into a policy, same as he did. You were 20 miles deep in your own grief, she said. You didn't have anything to give anyone. That doesn't make it right. No, she said. It makes it human. He found his father in the study, sitting in the chair by the window, with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance where old men keep the things they're still working through. Noah knocked on the open door. Elias looked up. Noah came in and sat in the other chair, the one across from his father, that he hadn't sat in since he was maybe 14 years old, before everything had calcified between them into its permanent shape. He didn't prepare what he was going to say. He'd decided on the walkover that preparation was the thing that had been failing both of them for decades, the rehearsed words that sounded right and meant nothing. I needed you, Noah said, after the accident. I needed you to call me, or come, or write something that wasn't a condolence form. And you didn't, and I turned it into a decision about who you were, and I've been running the ranch on that decision for 3 years. Elias was very still. I'm not telling you that to punish you with it, Noah said. I'm telling you because you're dying, And I am not going to sit across from you for however long we have left and pretend that things are a shape they're not." Elias's hands moved slightly in his lap. I didn't know what to say. "I know. I've never known what to say to you. You came out of the gate already, you were already yourself, from the beginning. You didn't need me the way Silas did, and I didn't know how to—" He stopped, straightened slightly. "That's not an excuse. I'm explaining a failure, not defending it." "I know that too," Noah said. They sat with it for a moment. The study around them held years of quiet that had hardened into something that was slowly, in this particular hour, beginning to soften. "She's good for you," Elias said. "I know." "I mean it in the way that matters," Elias said. "Not because she's capable, though she is, because you look at her and I can see you remembering that you're a person." He paused. "You forgot that. After the accident. You kept running the ranch, but you forgot you lived in it." Noah said nothing. "I signed the deed this morning," Elias said. "Garrett has the papers. Blackstone Ranch is yours properly and completely whatever happens." He looked at his son directly. "I should have done it years ago without conditions. The conditions were about me, not about you or the land. I'm sorry for that." It was the first time in Noah Carter's memory that his father had apologized for anything. He didn't know how to receive it cleanly. He sat with it for a moment, feeling its weight, deciding not to deflect it with something easier. "Thank you," he said. Elias nodded. "I still need to deal with Beaumont's debt claim," Noah said. "I know. Garrett is already looking at the instrument chain. There may be grounds to challenge the acquisition on transfer procedure." Elias's eyes sharpened, the businessman still functioning inside the dying man. "But if it goes to a judge, it goes to a judge. The ranch is in your name now. He can't touch the deed directly." "He can still tie up the operation," Noah said. "Liens disputes it costs time and money." "Then fight it with time and money," Elias said, "which is what people do." He looked at his son. "Stop fighting everything alone, Noah. It's the thing you and I have in common, and it hasn't served either of us." Noah looked at his father. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't look away. Meanwhile, Evelyn was writing letters. She sat at the desk in the parlor and wrote 4 letters that afternoon to Helen Marsh in Chicago, to the 2 other women she'd contacted during her months of preparation, and to a 4th name she'd been given, but hadn't yet reached out to. She wrote them plainly and specifically, asking each woman whether she would be willing to provide a formal legal statement to a Wyoming attorney regarding her experience with Richard Beaumont and the conditions under which she had entered and exited any financial or contractual arrangement with his family. She sealed each envelope carefully. Then she wrote a 5th letter to a journalist named Catherine Moore, who wrote for a Chicago paper that covered financial and social affairs, whom Evelyn had read for 3 years, and trusted in the specific way you trust someone whose work demonstrates they care about accuracy more than convenience. She told her everything. She didn't ask for a story. She offered documents. She let Catherine Moore decide what to do with them. Tom came back from the Halverson farm at dusk with 12 names and a handshake agreement that the county would pool resources to challenge the debt collection instrument collectively on the grounds that predatory acquisition of distressed debts was a practice the community had decided it would not tolerate. Jim Halverson himself rode over the next morning. He sat at Noah's kitchen table and drank Hattie's coffee and said, "6 years ago I lost pasture land to a man I'd never met who'd bought a bad note from a bank I'd never borrowed from. I swore I'd never let that happen to a neighbor again if I could stop it." He put out his hand. "You should have talked to us, Noah. That's the only thing I'm going to say about the years in between." Noah shook his hand. Hattie by the stove made a sound that was not quite a hum and not quite a word, but communicated comprehensive satisfaction. Richard Beaumont received the legal response to his debt notice on Thursday. It came from Garrett on Elias Carter's letterhead, citing 3 specific procedural irregularities in the transfer chain of the debt instrument, and informing him that the matter would be heard before a county judge, at which point the acquisition would be examined in full, including the circumstances of its timing and the identity of parties who may have provided information about Blackstone Ranch's financial position to facilitate its purchase. That last sentence was the important one. It meant Silas. By Friday, Richard had retained a Denver lawyer, and the Denver lawyer had apparently told him something that changed his arithmetic, because on Friday afternoon, a terse withdrawal notice arrived by courier, citing an internal review of the instrument's validity. He was folding. Not completely. Not without cost. But he was folding. Tom brought Noah the withdrawal notice, where he was working the gray mare, who had by now accepted the lead so completely that she moved with Noah like a conversation. Tom handed him the paper without comment and stood back. Noah read it, twice. Then he looked up and said, "Get everyone together at supper tonight. All the hands. Hattie, too." "What for?" Tom asked. "Because I've been running a ranch full of people who held this place together for 3 years, and I've never once sat down and acknowledged that." Tom blinked. Something in his face shifted, not surprise exactly, but the particular look of a man encountering something he'd given up expecting. "Yes, sir," he said. That supper was the loudest the Blackstone Ranch kitchen had ever been in 3 years. Noah sat at the head of the table and said simply without ceremony that the ranch was stable and the debt was being discharged, and that none of it would have been possible without the people around that table. And that he understood he hadn't been an easy man to work for, and he wasn't promising to become one, but he was promising to be a present one. One of the younger hands started clapping. Tom told him to stop, which he did, but not before the moment had landed. Hattie set down a pie she'd been keeping covered on the counter peach from the last of the summer preserves and cut it into 10 pieces and didn't say a single word about it, which was how Hattie Carter communicated the full extent of her feelings about anything. After supper, when everyone had drifted back to their quarters and the kitchen had quieted, Evelyn was washing cups at the basin when she heard Noah come back in from seeing the hands off. She heard him stop just inside the doorway. "You should leave those," he said. "They'll stick if I don't. Hattie will deal with them in the morning." Hattie has enough to deal with. He came to stand beside her at the basin. He picked up a cloth and started drying what she'd already washed, which was the most domestic thing she'd ever seen him do, and she was almost certain he didn't register how it looked. They worked in silence for a moment. "Richard is withdrawing the claim," she said. "I heard. And the letters I sent to Chicago, Catherine Moore wrote back." She paused her washing. "She wants to run the story, the pattern of the contracts, the other women, the family's legal practices." She looked at the water. "It's going to cause a significant amount of trouble for the Beaumont family." "Good," Noah said. "His father will fight it. They have lawyers." "So does the truth," he said. "Usually." She smiled at the basin. He didn't see it, or if he did, he didn't comment. "Evelyn," he said. She looked up. He had stopped drying. He was looking at her with the specific expression she'd learned to read over the past 2 weeks. The one that preceded the things he actually meant, as opposed to the things he'd decided were safe to say. "I know what I asked of you when you got here," he said. "And I know how it started. And I know what we said about after." She waited. "I'm asking you to reconsider after," he said. The kitchen held the sound of water and the distant movement of horses settling for the night, not as an arrangement, he said. Not as anything with terms or conditions or an end date. He put down the cloth. "Just stay. Because this is your home if you want it to be. Because you walked into this ranch with nothing, and in 2 weeks made it more alive than it's been in 3 years. He stopped. Started again differently. "Because when I'm around you, I remember things I forgot existed, like what it feels like to look forward to supper and to hear someone moving around in the kitchen at 6 in the morning and feel not lonely." Evelyn was very still. "I'm not asking you to love me," he said. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. I'm asking you to stay and let whatever this is become what it's going to become without a departure date hanging over it." She looked at him for a long moment. Everything in her that had been braced for 2 weeks against him, against this place, against the specific danger of wanting something enough to grieve it, slowly, carefully stopped bracing. "I wrote to my cousin in Montana," she said. 2 weeks ago. The telegraph line was back up." She paused. "I told her I'd found work, that I was staying for a while." He looked at her. "I didn't know why when I wrote it," she said. "I think I know now." Noah Carter looked at Evelyn Hayes for a long, steady moment. The way he looked at things that were real, things that had weight and substance and weren't going to dissolve when he reached for them. Then he reached for her slowly, carefully, giving her every possible moment to step back, and his hand came up to the side of her face with the kind of gentleness that doesn't announce itself because it's always been there just waiting for the right moment to be permitted. She didn't step back. She turned her face slightly into his hand and closed her eyes. He kissed her the way a man kisses someone he has no intention of releasing, not urgently, not performatively, but with the total and unhurried conviction of someone who has finally arrived somewhere after a very long road and is in no rush to leave. Slow. Certain. Real. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask for anything because it already knows the answer. Outside Wyoming did what Wyoming does at the end of autumn. The wind came down off the high country and moved through the ranch with cold authority, rattling the repaired window frames and bending the kitchen garden's last stubborn stalks and doing the particular work of seasons turning. Inside, neither of them noticed. For the first time in 3 years, the ranch house at Blackstone didn't feel empty. It felt exactly the size it was supposed to be. The morning after the kiss, nothing was said about it. Not because either of them was pretending it hadn't happened, but because some things don't need to be immediately translated into language. Some things need to breathe first to find their own shape, without the pressure of being named too quickly. Evelyn was at the stove when Noah came down, and he poured his own coffee and stood beside her for a moment without speaking close enough that their arms almost touched. And that was the conversation. That was the entire conversation. And it was enough. Hattie watched all of this from the far end of the kitchen, said absolutely nothing, and made her best biscuits of the autumn season. What changed was everything underneath the surface. The way Noah moved through the house was different, not relaxed exactly, because he was still fundamentally a man built from tension and work, but present. Awake to things he'd been moving through without seeing. He noticed that Evelyn had reorganized the supply shelf in the pantry. He noticed that she'd put a small bunch of dried wildflowers in the tin on the window ledge. He noticed these things and didn't say so directly, but he stopped walking past them like they weren't there. The first real test came 3 days later. Elias had a bad night. His doctor, a quiet man named Forsyth, who had been managing the old man's decline with competent sadness, came to find Noah at breakfast with the particular expression doctors wear when they are about to say something that can't be unsaid. He said it plainly. The heart was weakening faster than the previous month's assessment had suggested. Elias had weeks, not months. Possibly less. Noah sat with that for a long moment. Then he stood up and went to his father's room. He knocked. "Come in," Elias said, and his voice was different, thinner than it had been even a week ago. The voice of a man whose body was beginning to economize. Noah came in and sat in the chair beside the bed. He didn't speak immediately. Neither did his father. They sat together in the kind of quiet that two people can only share when they've finally stopped fighting the silence between them and agreed to just live in it. "The deed is signed," Elias said. "I know. The ranch is yours completely. Garrett has it filed in Crestfall." "I know, Father." "Silas won't contest it," Elias said. "I made that very clear before he left." He paused. "He's not a bad man, Noah. He's a small man. There's a difference. Small men aren't evil, they're just afraid, and they make choices from the fear. It doesn't excuse the choices, but it explains them." Noah said nothing. "You're not small," Elias said. "You were never small, even when you were shutting everything out. A small man wouldn't have kept this place alive on nothing but stubbornness for 3 years. He was quiet for a moment. "I should have told you that a long time ago." "You're telling me now," Noah said. Elias looked at his son. "Is she staying?" "She said she'd stay." "She means it," Elias said. "I can tell the difference between a woman who means something and a woman who's saying what's expected. She means it." He shifted slightly against his pillow. "Don't wait too long, Noah, to do whatever comes next. I made a habit of waiting until things were settled enough to be safe, and things are never settled enough to be safe, and I spent my whole life waiting." He looked at the window. "Don't be like me in that regard." "I'm not making any promises I can't keep," Noah said. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for motion." Elias closed his eyes briefly. "Go run your ranch. Send Evelyn to visit me this afternoon. I'd like to talk to her." Noah stood. He put his hand on his father's arm for a moment, brief, real, the gesture of a man relearning something he'd forgotten was available to him. Elias didn't open his eyes, but his expression changed in a way that said everything that needed saying. That afternoon, Evelyn sat with Elias for 2 hours. What passed between them in that room, neither of them told anyone directly, because some conversations belonged to the people who had them. But when Evelyn came out, her eyes were red in a way she didn't try to explain, and she went directly to the kitchen and started making the particular beef stew that had no practical justification except comfort. And she made enough for everyone on the ranch, and then some. Tom came in at dusk and said, "That smells like something's been settled." "Eat your supper, Tom," Hattie said. He did. The news from Chicago arrived the following week in the form of a letter from Catherine Moore, and it was larger than Evelyn had anticipated. The story had run. Not one piece, a series. 3 consecutive issues of the paper carrying documented accounts from 4 women with financial records and correspondence, showing the pattern of the Beaumont family's contractual practices across more than a decade. The response had been immediate and substantial. 2 other papers had picked up the story. A Chicago alderman whose own daughter had been caught in a similar arrangement had called for a formal inquiry. Richard Beaumont's family had released a statement through their lawyer calling the accounts fabricated. The lawyer had resigned 4 days later. Evelyn read the letter at the kitchen table and then sat very still for a long time. Noah came in and saw her face. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it. He set it down. "Is this what you wanted?" "I wanted to stop him from doing it again," she said. "I wanted the women he'd done it to not have to carry it alone anymore." She looked at the letter. I didn't need it to be this large." "But it is," Noah said. "Yes. And you did that," he said. "You built that. In the months before you ever got to Wyoming, when you were still running and terrified, you were also building the thing that would eventually dismantle him." She looked at him. "You're the most quietly formidable person I've ever met," he said. "And I've met my father." She laughed. It was the fullest, most unguarded laugh he'd heard from her, and it startled both of them with its sincerity. She covered her mouth for a second, then stopped covering it because she was done, she decided, in that precise moment, with covering things. That was a Tuesday. On Thursday, a wire arrived from Silas. It was addressed to Noah, and it was 3 sentences. He had heard about Beaumont's collapse. He wanted Noah to know he was severing the contact he'd had with the man. And he said plainly, without flourish, that he was sorry for what he'd attempted to do to the ranch, and that he didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted to say it while he still could. Noah read it twice. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet," he said. "He doesn't need an answer tonight." He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "But I think I'll write back eventually. Not for him. For my father." Evelyn watched him fold the wire and felt something in her chest that she had stopped trying to classify weeks ago because it was too large for any of the words she kept trying to put on it. "You're a better man than you think you are," she said. He gave her a look. "Don't make it into something." "I'm not making it into anything. I'm stating a fact." "It's not a fact. It's an opinion." "I have a lot of facts that look like opinions to people who aren't paying attention," she said. He almost smiled. She saw it, the almost, and it was better than most people's full ones. Elias Carter passed away on a Thursday morning in the last week of October, with Noah on one side of him and Evelyn on the other, and Dr. Forsythe standing quietly near the door. He went the way he had lived, upright, deliberate, refusing to make any more noise about it than was absolutely necessary. He said his son's name once near the end, in a tone that was quieter than anything Noah had ever heard from him, and then he was gone. Noah sat with it for a long time without moving. Evelyn stayed in the room with him. She didn't speak. She didn't try to resolve it or cushion it or translate it into something more manageable. She just stayed, which was the thing he needed more than anything, and the thing he'd never had from anyone in 3 years of loss. When he finally stood, he looked at her with a face that had been taken apart and slowly, carefully put back together into something slightly different from before. Not broken, just changed. The way a fence post is different after a hard winter, still standing, still solid, but knowing now what it has held against. "Thank you," he said. She took his hand. He held it. Outside, the October wind moved through Blackstone Ranch with the serious authority of the season changing, and the horses in the pasture lifted their heads to it, and the smoke from Hattie's kitchen rose straight up in the still morning air, and the land kept being what it was, patient, permanent, quietly magnificent in the way of things that have endured. The winter set in by November, and with it, something none of them had expected, a kind of peace that had nothing to do with absence of trouble and everything to do with the presence of people who had decided to stay. The ranch hand's rhythm tightened, the way it does when cold demands efficiency. Tom managed the cattle rotation with the precision of someone who understood the cold was not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be respected. Hattie made soups that had no practical justification beyond the fact that they were perfect, and she made them every other day throughout November without being asked. The gray mare had been named by consensus among the younger hands. They called her November, which Evelyn thought was exactly right. Noah started working on the chapel. It was the small stone structure on the north side of the property that had been Margaret's particular idea. She'd always wanted a place where the ranch hands could gather, not for any denomination specifically, but for the kind of quiet that working people need and rarely make time for. After the accident, Noah had boarded it up without explanation and not looked at it directly in 3 years. He unboarded it on a Tuesday morning in early November without saying anything to anyone. Evelyn saw him carrying timber toward it from the supply barn and watched from the kitchen window for a long moment without moving. Then she went to find Tom. "Get whoever's free this afternoon," she said. "He's not going to ask for help." Tom looked at the window, looked at her. "No," he said. "He never does." By noon, there were 4 men working on the chapel alongside Noah, who hadn't asked a single one of them to be there and didn't tell them to leave. Evelyn brought out coffee at 2 o'clock and set it on the fence post and went back inside without making a production of it. From inside the structure, she heard Noah's voice carrying to one of the younger hands. Something about the angle of the roof. Beams the explanation patient and detailed the voice of a man who was teaching because he wanted to, not because anyone required it of him. She stood in the kitchen and listened to it and thought, this is what it sounds like when someone comes back. Not loudly, not in a rush, just the steady, ordinary sound of a person deciding to be present in their own life again. The legal matter with Beaumont's debt instrument was dismissed by the county judge in December on the grounds that 2 of the 3 procedural challenges Garrett had identified proved sufficient to invalidate the acquisition chain. The mining company that Silas had been courting on Beaumont's behalf sent a single letter, received no response, and did not write again. Evelyn received a letter from Helen Marsh in Chicago, the first of the women she'd contacted, the first name on the list she'd built during her months of running. Helen wrote to say that the inquiry had expanded, that 2 more women had come forward, that the Beaumont family's lawyer had filed for an extension that was denied, that it was, Helen wrote, the first time in 6 years she had woken up and not felt the particular weight of a thing she'd never been allowed to speak about. Evelyn wrote back immediately. She told Helen about Wyoming, about a kitchen with a cast-iron stove and a cook named Hattie and a gray mare named November and a man who'd rebuilt something she hadn't known could be rebuilt. She didn't call it love, not in the letter. But Helen would understand what she meant. Silas wrote again in December. A longer letter this time. He said Clara had asked him to write. He said he understood if the letter went unanswered. He said that their father had sent him a short note in the last weeks of his life, a note he hadn't shared with anyone, and that it had said things Silas was still working through. He didn't say what the note contained. He didn't ask for anything. He signed it your brother. Noah read it at the kitchen table, and sat with it the way he sat with hard things, not avoiding them, not rushing them, just holding them at the right distance until they showed him what they were. "I'm going to write back," he said. Evelyn was sewing by the window. She didn't look up. "I know." "It's not." He stopped. "It doesn't mean I've forgotten what he tried to do." "I know that too. It means—" He turned the letter over in his hands. "My father was alone for 30 years because he didn't know how to close a distance he'd created. I'm not doing that, not even with Silas." She looked up. He was looking at the letter with the particular expression of a man making a decision that costs him something, but that he's making anyway because the cost of not making it is higher. "He's still your brother," she said. "Yeah," Noah said. "He is." He went to get paper. The snow came properly the third week of December. The real Wyoming kind. Not decorative, but absolute, covering the land, with the flat, serious authority of a thing that means exactly what it looks like. The ranch kept moving. The hands had been through Wyoming winters before and knew how to work inside them. And there was a particular companionship to those short, cold days that Evelyn found herself inside before she'd even noticed entering it. She taught Hattie's granddaughter, who'd come to stay for the winter, while her parents handled a family matter in Cheyenne, how to sew a proper hem and how to read the grain of fabric. The girl was 12 and fierce, and reminded Evelyn in a specific way of herself at that age, before the world had gotten organized about telling her what she was and wasn't. "You could open a shop," the girl said one afternoon, watching Evelyn's hands move over a length of wool. "I had a shop," Evelyn said. "In Chicago." "Why'd you leave?" "It got complicated." The girl thought about this. "My grandmother says complicated is just what simple things look like before you figure them out." Evelyn looked at the girl. "That sounds right to me," she said. Christmas came, and the ranch house was louder than it had been in years. The hands, several of whom had nowhere to go for the holiday, ate at the long table with a volume that made Hattie complain about twice and enable completely. Noah sat at the head of the table and didn't say much, which was his way. But he stayed at the table long after the meal was finished, nursing his coffee and listening to Tom tell increasingly improbable stories about previous winters, and the fact of his staying was the thing itself. Evelyn sat beside him. At some point, without discussion, his hand found hers on the table and stayed there. Tom finished his story. Someone laughed. The lamp above the table swayed slightly in a draft from the door. Nobody said anything about the hands. But the younger hands noticed, and they shared a look across the table that was the specific look of people who have been waiting for something to finally settle and are relieved that it has. It was a Thursday evening in early January when Noah asked her to walk with him. He said it simply, "Come walk with me," after supper, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and Hattie had retired, and the kitchen was cleaned, and the house was in the quiet mode it took on at the end of a working day. He had his coat, and he brought hers from the hook without being asked. She put it on. They walked out into the Wyoming winter, which was doing what Wyoming winter does at night, filling the world with the kind of cold and quiet that makes everything small and clear and exact. Their breath showed in the air, and the stars overhead were so dense, they looked structural. He walked her to the hill on the north side of the property, above the chapel, where the land opened out, and you could see the full length of Blackstone Ranch below the bunkhouse, with its yellow windows, the barn, the corral where November stood in the dark, with her head up the ranch house, with its warm light pouring out from Hattie's kitchen window into the snow. They stood there for a moment without speaking. Below them, the ranch they had both in their different ways needed to survive. "I've been working on something to say," Noah said. "How long?" 3 weeks. She looked at the side of his face. "And I can't find the right words, which is—" He exhaled. "I've never been good at the words." "You're better at them than you think. Not for this," he said. "For this, I keep coming up short." He turned to face her, and she turned to face him. And the cold around them was the kind that makes everything feel more specific, every detail present and exact. "I'm not a man who does things halfway," he said. "You know that." "I know that," she said. so I'm not going to ask this halfway." He reached into his coat pocket. He brought out a small velvet box, dark blue, the velvet worn at one corner, as if he'd been carrying it long enough to worry it between his fingers. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "My father brought it when he came. He left it with me without explanation, which was his way of explaining everything. He held it, but didn't open it yet. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not. I'm not asking you to fit into a shape that was made for someone else. I'm asking you to let me build something new with you, with this land, with whatever time we have, on those terms and no others." He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, a small stone set in plain silver, the kind of ring made for a woman who worked with her hands and needed it to survive real life. He looked at her. "You asked me once to pretend," he said. "And I shouldn't have, because pretending was never what I needed. What I needed was you, actual you, the woman who showed up soaking wet and asked for a night in my barn, and then quietly saved everything I'd been too stubborn to admit was falling apart." His voice was steady, certain, the voice he used for things that were true and didn't require dressing up. "I love you, Evelyn. Not the arrangement, not the performance, you. And I want the rest of my life to be honest about that." The valley below them held its breath. The snow fell in small, steady increments, each flake finding its place without urgency. Evelyn Hayes looked at Noah Carter, at the man who had opened a barn door for a stranger and handed her food without wanting to be thanked for it, who had carried grief the size of a continent and kept his land alive inside it, who had learned slowly and imperfectly and with real effort how to let something back in, and felt everything that had been careful and contained and waiting in her chest simply open like a window after a long winter, letting in air that she'd forgotten was available. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. He looked at it on her hand with an expression she recognized now, not cataloging, not assessing, just seeing, just being present with something real. She stepped into him. He put his arms around her the way he did everything that mattered without ceremony, just completely. They stood on the hill above Blackstone Ranch, with the snow falling around them, and the lanterns glowing warm in the valley below. And neither of them said anything else for a long time, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Everything had already been said. In the weeks and months that followed, people in Crestfall noticed that Noah Carter laughed more easily, that he came to town more often, that the woman beside him, Evelyn Carter seamstress, the one who'd faced down the Chicago man at the Harvest Festival, walked through the world with the particular confidence of someone who has stopped waiting for permission. The chapel was finished in the spring. On the first Sunday, it was used the ranch hands gathered inside without being asked. And Hattie sat in the front row in the good dress she wore exactly 4 times a year. And Tom stood in the back with his hat in his hands. And November could be heard from the pasture, in the particular way horses have of making themselves part of things. Evelyn sat beside Noah in that chapel, her shoulder against his, the ring on her finger catching the morning light coming through the newly repaired window. He had built the chapel, he told her once, not to hold on to the past, but to prove to himself that something beautiful could still grow from the same ground where the hardest thing had happened. And it could. Because that is what ground does if you stay on it long enough and do the honest work and stop running from the parts that ache. Because love, the real kind, does not arrive with announcements. It arrives quietly in the middle of ordinary things. A barn door opened in the rain. Biscuits left on a fence post, with no note. A hand held at a table. A question asked on a hill in the snow, and it stays, and it changes the shape of everything. It touches, and eventually you look up and realize that the life you weren't sure you deserved has become exactly the life you are living. Evelyn Carter knew this. Noah Carter knew it too. And Blackstone Ranch, with its gray mare and its mended window frames and its kitchen that smelled permanently of Hattie's good cooking, and its chapel standing solid against the Wyoming sky, knew it the way land knows things, not in words, but in the deep, unshakable certainty of something that has finally, after a long season of waiting, come into full and permanent bloom.